Have you ever experienced that unsettling, almost visceral feeling that something was fundamentally wrong in an interaction, a negotiation, or even a relationship, yet found yourself frustratingly unable to explain precisely what it was, as if somehow the decisions you were making weren't entirely authentically yours, as if you were being subtly yet powerfully guided, almost steered by an invisible force, an unseen hand shaping your choices? Perhaps you found yourself reluctantly doing favors you genuinely didn't want to do, feeling an inexplicable pressure to comply. Maybe you've conceded in arguments where you knew, deep down, you were right, yet somehow felt compelled to back down. Or perhaps you've placed your trust in individuals who initially presented one face only to later reveal a startlingly different, perhaps manipulative true nature. If any of this resonates with you, if these scenarios strike a familiar chord, and I suspect for most of us they do, then this exploration is unequivocally for you. Because here lies the brutal, often uncomfortable truth. You are likely being manipulated subtly yet consistently, almost every single day, manipulated perhaps by people close to you, unknowingly leveraging emotional ties, manipulated by the pervasive narratives spun by the media, manipulated by leaders adept at swaying opinion, manipulated by anyone who possesses an intuitive or learned understanding of the secret, often unconscious mechanisms of the human mind. And perhaps the most insidious, most dangerous part of this reality, you often don't even realize it's happening. Effective manipulation rarely requires overt hypnosis or the dramatic mind control depicted in cinema. The most potent, most successful manipulation is precisely the kind that masterfully convinces you that you are in control, that the ultimate decision was entirely yours, that any subsequent negative outcome, any mistake was solely your responsibility. The vast majority of people tragically navigate their lives in precisely this manner, silently being guided like unsuspecting pieces on a complex board game they weren't even aware they were playing. And when occasionally an inkling of resistance arises, when they attempt to push back or question the dynamic, they are often immediately flooded with feelings of guilt, fear, or self-doubt. They have been subtly yet powerfully emotionally trained over years, perhaps decades, not to resist, to prioritize harmony or avoid conflict above asserting their own needs or truths. And if at this very moment you find yourself thinking, "This doesn't really happen to me," I urge you to stop right now, because that very thought, that confident sense of immunity, is exactly what a skilled manipulator wants you to believe. Complacency is their greatest ally. In this exploration, I will not offer you comforting platitudes or easy reassurances. Instead, I will endeavor to provide you with tools, conceptual tools, awareness tools, drawn from the often unsettling yet undeniably astute observations of Niccolò Machiavelli. Because those individuals who truly master the intricate art of manipulation as Machiavelli understood with chilling clarity, rarely need to resort to shouting overt force or explicit coercion. They simply observe. They patiently study your weaknesses, your desires, your fears. They understand the hidden levers of your human nature, and then strategically they act. They know precisely what drives you. And if you remain fundamentally unaware of your own inner drivers, rest assured you will be driven, often in directions not of your own conscious choosing. Here you will begin to understand how people manipulate others, often without the target even realizing it. You will learn to recognize the subtle patterns, the common emotional tricks, the nuanced games of control that permeate so many human interactions. Crucially, you will also begin to identify your own inherent vulnerabilities, the specific emotional blind spots that make you susceptible. And most importantly, you will learn practical strategies for how to effectively shield your mind, reclaiming your autonomy. Because true, authentic freedom isn't merely about having the ability to do what you want. It's about possessing the self-awareness to truly know why you want it in the first place. Consider this video a call, a summons specifically intended For those who are weary, bone-tired of feeling perpetually used or taken advantage of. For those who have suffered in silence, bearing the weight of manipulation without understanding its mechanics. For those who have been unfairly blamed, systematically silenced, relentlessly conditioned to prioritize others' needs above their own. Here you will learn the foundational principles required to step out of the passive role of the puppet and begin consciously adopting the proactive role of the strategist in your own life. But I must issue a stern warning. Once you begin to truly see the underlying dynamics of manipulation, once the veil is lifted, you won't be able to pretend you don't know anymore. Ignorance, however blissful, will no longer be an option. So from this moment forward, prepare yourself, because what you are about to discover has the potential to completely, irrevocably change the way you perceive people, your relationships, and perhaps most profoundly yourself. Have you ever noticed, with a mixture of perhaps frustration and grudging admiration, how certain individuals always seem to effortlessly get what they want, often even when by objective standards they don't necessarily deserve it, based on merit or effort alone? They rarely resort to overt shouting, explicit threats, or pathetic begging. Instead, they possess a subtle yet powerful ability to persuade. They skillfully engage others on an emotional level. They masterfully make you believe that giving in, acquiescing to their desires, was somehow your idea all along, a logical or even beneficial choice for you. This is not simply innate charisma, although charm can certainly be a tool in their arsenal. This is technique. This is manipulation executed in its purest, most effective, and often most insidious form. The skilled manipulator rarely acts on raw impulse. Their primary mode of operation is observation. They meticulously study you, your nonverbal cues, your habitual reactions, your known weaknesses, your unspoken emotional needs. They keenly notice when you crave approval, when you exhibit a fear of rejection, when you are susceptible to feelings of guilt for asserting yourself or saying no. And once identified, they skillfully, often subtly, use these vulnerabilities as levers to achieve their desired outcome. Manipulation often begins long before the first word is even spoken. It starts with the silent, astute reading of your body language, your posture, your eye contact, your subtle shifts in expression. It involves attuning to the tone of your voice, noticing hesitations or uncertainties. It even extends to interpreting the pauses between your sentences, gleaning information from what is not said as much as what is. Some manipulators employ charm as their primary weapon. They radiate warmth, smile, readily offer effusive compliments, and present themselves as uniquely understanding, different from all the others. They skillfully make you feel genuinely seen, heard, special. But beneath this polished veneer of exceptional kindness often lies cold calculation. They are consciously or unconsciously creating an emotional debt within you. Because human psychology dictates that when someone appears excessively good or generous towards us, our natural instinct often pushes us to reciprocate, to balance the scales. And it is precisely at that moment, when you feel subtly indebted, that you begin to lower your defenses and start to give in. Others prefer to wield the potent weapon of guilt. They masterfully play the victim, subtly conveying how overwhelmed they are, how misunderstood they feel, lamenting that no one truly comprehends their struggles, perhaps implying that only you possess the capacity to truly help or understand them. Gradually, skillfully, they maneuver you into a position of profound emotional responsibility for their well-being. And once this dynamic is established, if you dare to pull away slightly or decline a request, they rarely need to engage in overt conflict. A strategically placed a subtly cutting remark veiled as concern, a lingering look of profound sadness or disappointment is often enough to trigger your ingrained guilt and bring you back into line. The subtle manipulator rarely needs to ask for things explicitly. They expertly create situations where you feel compelled to offer. And then there are those who operate primarily through the insidious manipulation of fear. They subtly or sometimes overtly paint catastrophic scenarios designed to prey on your deepest anxieties. If you do this, you'll inevitably end up alone. If you leave me, you'll never find someone who understands you like I do again. They don't bind you with physical chains, but with paralyzing ideas. They skillfully make you doubt your own judgment, your own competence, your own ability to act independently and survive without them. And so tragically you remain trapped, seemingly of your own volition, paralyzed by the fears they have so expertly stoked. These manipulative strategies, in their essence, are not new. Niccolò Machiavelli, in his timeless and often controversial treatise, The Prince, described with almost surgical coldness as how manipulation, deception, and the strategic management of perception can be utilized not just by individuals, but as legitimate, even necessary tools of political power. He understood, perhaps before anyone else articulated it so clearly, that human beings are fundamentally driven not just by reason, but powerfully by self-interests and volatile emotions. And crucially, he recognized that those who grasp this fundamental truth, who understand these underlying psychological levers, possess the capacity to effectively shape realities, influence outcomes, and maintain control. As Machiavelli famously stated, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. Manipulation operates precisely on this principle. It is primarily a visual and emotional spectacle meticulously staged to appear as authentic reality. The manipulator skillfully creates a theater, assigning roles, writing the script, directing the emotional tone, and you often, without realizing it, become an unwitting actor, part of the cast. They subtly dictate your lines, shape your reactions, and guide your decisions. And perhaps the scariest part, you often genuinely believe the plot is yours, that you are acting freely. But this manipulative theater, this carefully constructed illusion, only works because there exists something within you that allows it entry, that resonates with the manipulator's tactics. A pre-existing gap in your self-awareness, an unhealed emotional weakness, an unacknowledged desire or fear. This internal vulnerability is the fertile ground upon which manipulation takes root. And this brings us directly to the next crucial part of our exploration: understanding the specific vulnerabilities that make you a potential target. Because as long as you remain fundamentally unaware of what weakens you psychologically, what emotional needs remain unmet, you will continue to be susceptible to manipulation, often tragically mistaking it for genuine love, loyal friendship, or deserved respect. Let's expose these common vulnerabilities now. You are not manipulated simply because you are inherently weak. You are manipulated primarily because you are human, because there exists within the complex tapestry of every human psyche inherent emotional blind spots, unresolved desires, yearning for fulfillment, old wounds that haven't fully healed, silent, often unconscious needs that act as psychological gaps. And it is precisely into these gaps, these areas of vulnerability, that the skilled manipulator instinctively or sometimes consciously inserts their influence. They rarely need to resort to brute force. They simply need to patiently listen, keenly perceive what you, yourself, may not even consciously see within your own being, and then subtly leverage that knowledge. Some of us carry, often from early life experiences, an almost insatiable thirst for approval. From a young age, perhaps we were implicitly or explicitly taught to constantly please others in order to feel worthy of affection or acceptance. We learn tragically that love might come primarily as a reward for compliance, rather than being offered unconditionally as a fundamental right. And so, driven by this deep-seated need, we begin to meticulously shape our attitudes, our behaviors, even our expressed opinions, primarily to be accepted, valued, seen. This fundamental need, this persistent ache for external validation, this perceived hole in the chest, acts as an open invitation for the manipulator. They skillfully offer you mere crumbs of validation, A well-timed compliment, feigned agreement, superficial attentiveness, and in return, often without realizing the transaction you offer them. Your blind loyalty, your compliance, your willingness to overlook red flags. They expertly say precisely what you desperately want to hear, and in exchange you incrementally give up your autonomy, your critical judgment, your own authentic voice. Others carry the heavy, often invisible burden of pervasive guilt. They habitually blame themselves for asserting their needs, for saying no, for prioritizing their own well-being, for setting necessary boundaries. Perhaps they were explicitly taught or subtly conditioned to believe that thinking of oneself is inherently selfish, that relentless self-sacrifice is the ultimate virtue. And that is precisely why, even when a nagging feeling arises that something is fundamentally wrong in a dynamic, they hesitate to react. They fail to assert themselves because they immediately begin to second-guess thinking. Perhaps they are being too harsh, too ungrateful, too cold. The manipulator acutely recognizes this ingrained guilt. They often skillfully insinuate themselves into your life, presenting themselves as someone who only wants what's best for you, someone deeply concerned for your welfare. And armed with this facade of benevolent intention, they gradually begin to control your decisions through a distorted morality, leveraging your own guilt against you. And then there are those individuals primarily driven by deep-seated fear, the paralyzing fear of rejection, the terrifying fear of loneliness, the haunting fear of being ultimately forgotten or abandoned. Such individuals often find themselves desperately clinging to any form of connection, even relationships that are demonstrably toxic or draining solely out of a profound dread of facing the perceived emptiness, the existential void that they associate with being alone. The manipulator readily offers a false sense of security, a temporary haven from these fears, only to later subtly or overtly threaten to take it away if their demands are not met. They skillfully make you feel that without them, you are fundamentally inadequate, incapable, perhaps even nobody. And tragically, you often believe it precisely because your own pre-existing fear has already whispered those same debilitating messages to you long before they ever arrived on the scene. Crucially, all these pervasive vulnerabilities, the need for approval, the burden of guilt, the paralysis of fear, have an origin. They do not simply arise from nowhere. They are typically the complex result of past experiences, unresolved silent traumas from childhood, or previous relationships deeply ingrained, inherited emotional conditioning passed down through families or cultures. But as long as you remain fundamentally unaware of these wounds, as long as you fail to consciously confront and begin the process of healing them, they remain psychologically open, and those individuals who approach you with a disarming smile on their lips but harbor ulterior motives often possess an uncanny ability to know exactly where to touch, where to apply pressure to trigger those old pains and leverage your predictable reactions. Machiavelli, again with his characteristic lack of sentimentality, knew this fundamental truth about human nature. He understood that achieving real control over others rarely requires overt physical force. It primarily demands an astute knowledge of human weaknesses, motivations, and emotional triggers. The nature of peoples is variable, he wrote, and while it is easy to persuade them, it is difficult to fix them in that persuasion. The manipulator, therefore, often doesn't need to engage in protracted efforts of logical persuasion. They simply skillfully occupy the empty spaces within your psyche. They subtly settle where conscious awareness is lacking. But, and this is the vital message of hope, there is a way out. You do not have to remain perpetually emotionally predictable forever, susceptible to these manipulative tactics. You can learn to consciously identify your own psychological gaps, your specific areas of vulnerability, and begin the empowering process of sealing them through self-awareness, healing, and the cultivation of inner strength. Only then will you cease to be an easy target. Only then will you begin to navigate the world with genuine clarity, autonomy, and self-possession. And that transformative process, the development of real emotional immunity, is precisely what we will delve into in the next crucial section. How to develop authentic emotional armor, how to create true lasting immunity against manipulation. Are you ready to finally stop being a hostage to your own vulnerabilities? Because the next step requires significant courage. Most people genuinely want to stop being manipulated, to reclaim their sense of agency and autonomy. But precious few are truly willing to pay the necessary price for genuine emotional freedom. The often uncomfortable, sometimes painful price of brutal self-awareness. Because the unvarnished truth often sets you free, but first it frequently hurts. And the very first wound you absolutely need to confront and begin healing is the pervasive, deeply ingrained illusion that simply being a good, empathetic, and understanding person somehow automatically protects you from manipulation. It doesn't. In fact, tragically, it is often precisely these admirable virtues, when not balanced with discerning clarity and strong boundaries, that inadvertently make you an easy target for those skilled in exploitation. Developing genuine emotional immunity is not about becoming cold, callous, or emotionally detached. It is fundamentally about becoming profoundly aware. It's about consciously stopping the automatic conditioned reactions to the specific emotional triggers that manipulators expertly wield against you. And the first crucial step towards achieving this awareness is rigorously recognizing your own patterns. Observe yourself honestly in challenging interactions. What specific triggers consistently cause you to give in, to abandon your own needs, to lose your center? Is it the paralyzing fear of disappointing someone you care about? Is it the overwhelming anxiety of being rejected or abandoned? Is it the deeply ingrained desire to keep the peace at any cost, even if that peace is built on a foundation of self-betrayal? When you begin to clearly understand what specifically drives your reactive behavior, you start to fundamentally change the game. Knowledge of your triggers is the first line of defense. The second essential step is to actively cultivate what Machiavelli might have termed strategic detachment. This doesn't mean becoming uncaring. It means learning to emotionally distance yourself slightly from intense situations without losing your capacity for empathy or understanding. This translates into practicing the skill of observing interactions, including your own internal reactions, without immediately getting emotionally involved or swept away. It means consciously not responding to compliments as if they were absolute objective truths, recognizing they might be strategic flattery. It means developing the acuity to notice when someone is attempting to guide you through emotion, guilt, fear, pity, excitement, and deliberately pausing to think critically before reacting or committing. The manipulator heavily relies on your emotional urgency. They need you to feel intensely and react quickly, not to engage in thoughtful consideration. So deliberately choose to think. The third vital step is to consciously strive to become unpredictable in your responses. Manipulators thrive on predictability. It's the bedrock of their strategy. They meticulously map your typical responses. They know that if they employ tactic AEG, crying expressing vulnerability, you will predictably respond with BEG, offering comfort, taking responsibility. They know that if they use tactic C, e.g. flattery, you will likely respond with D, e.g. lowering your guard, becoming more agreeable. They anticipate that if they apply pressure tactic E, you will eventually give in response. F, your most powerful defense, therefore lies in deliberately breaking this predictable pattern. Surprise them, consciously choose to say no precisely when they anticipate an easy yes. Strategically disappear or become less available exactly when they expect you to pursue or insist. Remain calmly silent precisely when they are attempting to provoke a heated confrontation. This unpredictable behavior completely disarms their game and often forces the other person caught off guard to reveal their true underlying intentions. Another fundamental point is the ongoing work of building a solid, internally validated identity. The more deeply you know who you are, your values, your principles, your non-negotiables, the less you inherently need to constantly prove your worth or seek validation from external sources. And the less you need external validation, the less power others possess over you. Manipulators often thrive by subtly controlling the perception you have of yourself. They skillfully plant seeds of doubt, encourage you to question your own judgment, nudge you to reevaluate your decisions, always subtly steering you towards alignment with their narrative. When your own internal vision of yourself is firm, clear, and self-generated, this external attempt at control significantly loses its strength. And do not be fooled. This entire process is training. Emotional immunity doesn't magically appear after watching a single video or reading one book. It is cultivated through the constant, dedicated practice of rigorous self-observation, consciously resisting the urgency to immediately please or appease, consistently standing by your decisions, even when facing discomfort or disapproval, and perpetually remembering that you ultimately owe nothing to anyone except your own mental integrity and well-being. Simply staying sane, maintaining your inner equilibrium in a world where subtle emotional games are constantly being played is in itself a profound act of resistance. Machiavelli wrote with his characteristic starkness that men must either be pampered or crushed, for they can avenge slight injuries but not grave ones. This thought is undeniably harsh, perhaps even morally troubling, but it reveals an uncomfortable truth about power dynamics. In the often unspoken game of emotional influence, there is rarely true neutrality. Either you learn to consciously dominate the emotional field, meaning master your own emotions and understand those of others, or you will inevitably be dominated by it. But what happens when the manipulator isn't a distant adversary, but someone deeply embedded in your daily life? What if they reside at home, at work, perhaps even sleep in the bed next to you? How do you effectively act? How do you protect yourself when you cannot simply cut the ties cleanly? In the next crucial part, we will delve into the far more delicate, complex, and often painful realm of manipulation within close relationships. We will explore how to navigate and ultimately escape emotional control, even when the manipulator is someone you genuinely love. And this perhaps will represent the hardest, most demanding test of your newfound strength and awareness. It's relatively straightforward to discuss the tactics of manipulation when the perpetrator is a stranger, a distant colleague, or a figure encountered briefly in the external world. The truly hard part, the challenge that cuts deepest and demands the most courage, is confronting this uncomfortable truth. When the individual subtly controlling you, shaping your reality through emotional leverage, is someone you genuinely love. A father or mother whose approval you still desperately crave. A romantic partner with whom you share deep intimacy and history. A boss who perhaps gave you a crucial opportunity. A cherished childhood friend bound by years of shared experience. In these intimate contexts, manipulation rarely presents itself overtly. It becomes far more subtle, more insidious, more dangerously intertwined with genuine affection, making it incredibly difficult to recognize and resist. And consequently, it becomes infinitely more painful because it often comes skillfully disguised as affection. I only criticize you because I care so much. As genuine care, I worry about you making that choice, or as unwavering loyalty after all I've done for you. And you often paralyzed by the fear of losing the connection, the fear of causing irreparable damage to the relationship, remains silently trapped within an invisible yet suffocating emotional web that systematically consumes your energy, erodes your clarity, and gradually diminishes your very sense of identity. The intimate manipulator rarely needs to resort to outright lies. Skillful distortion of the truth often suffices, They don't typically need to shout or threaten. Subtle insinuation or passive-aggressive remarks achieve the desired effect more effectively. They rarely forbid you from making a choice outright. Instead, they expertly make you feel cripplingly guilty for choosing differently than they would prefer. Over time, often imperceptibly, you stop questioning the dynamic. You begin unconsciously walking on eggshells, constantly monitoring their moods, anticipating their reactions. You diligently avoid conflicts, often at the expense of your own needs and truths. You learn to anticipate their potential reactions, to keep the peace, preemptively modifying your behavior to avoid triggering their disapproval or anger. And without consciously realizing the extent of the entrapment, you become a hostage within an invisible prison meticulously built not with iron bars but with the far stronger, more insidious bricks of emotion. Your love, your loyalty, your guilt, your fear. In a romantic relationship, this emotional control can easily masquerade as deep affection. I only act this way because I love you so intensely. Without you, my life has absolutely no meaning. But let us be clear, love that consistently demands submission, that thrives on control, that punishes autonomy is not genuine love. It is emotional blackmail skillfully disguised. Within the family unit, manipulation often cloaks itself in the guise of tradition or obligation. You can't possibly do this to your mother after everything she's sacrificed. You owe us respect. How dare you question our judgment? But respect extracted through guilt or obligation is not authentic respect. It is simply control wearing a more socially acceptable mask. At work, manipulation might present itself as an appeal to loyalty or gratitude. You have to be grateful for this opportunity. Who else would give you a chance like this? But gratitude twisted into an instrument of debt used to demand unquestioning compliance or prevent you from pursuing better opportunities is pure, unadulterated manipulation. And here lies the absolutely central, non-negotiable point. Proximity does not justify emotional violation. Shared history does not grant permission for control. Love does not bestow the right to shape another human being through the insidious tools of fear or guilt. However, breaking free from these deeply ingrained, emotionally charged cycles requires you first to summon the courage to accept something profoundly uncomfortable. Not every relationship where genuine affection exists is necessarily psychologically healthy. Not every person who claims to love you actually possesses the emotional maturity or self-awareness to love you freely, respecting your autonomy. And crucially, not every bond that holds you tightly is necessarily protecting you. Some bonds, however familiar or comforting they may seem, are simply preventing you from growing, keeping you small, trapped within a dysfunctional dynamic. But how practically does one begin to act when trapped within such complex and emotionally fraught situations? First, begin by consciously, deliberately setting boundaries. Not aggressive demands, but clear, firm boundaries regarding what you will and will not accept, what you are and are not willing to do. And crucially, these boundaries do not require lengthy justification or apology. A simple calm no, stated with serenity and conviction, often possesses far more power than 1,000 desperate arguments or elaborate explanations. Then often comes the necessary, albeit challenging, step of exposure. This means finding the courage to calmly yet clearly say what you see, articulate what you feel in response to their behavior, and state what you will no longer accept. The primary purpose here is not necessarily to convince the other person or force them to change, as that is often beyond your control, but rather to assert yourself before yourself, to reclaim your own voice and validate your own experience. And finally, perhaps most crucially, you must learn to stand firm when the inevitable reactions come, because rest assured, they will come. You might face insults, accusations, prolonged periods of victimhood, manipulative displays of emotion, or punitive silence designed to punish your assertion. The manipulator instinctively feeds on your hesitation, your self-doubt. They will relentlessly test your limits, hoping you will eventually back down, revert to the old pattern, and restore their sense of control. And here lies the reality that few possess the raw courage to fully face. Sometimes truly loving someone or honoring the love you once shared means strategically stepping away. It might mean consciously choosing to exit the dysfunctional dance, refusing to participate in the familiar destructive patterns any longer. It might mean allowing the other person the difficult yet potentially transformative space to finally confront their own emptiness, their own manipulative tendencies, their own unresolved issues without you constantly being there to cushion the blow or enable the dysfunction. Because as long as you remain present perpetually, trying to save, sustain, explain, or fix, they will likely not change. And in the process, you will inevitably lose yourself. It is undoubtedly a difficult, often heartbreaking choice. But sometimes it is the only necessary one for your own survival and growth. Because only those individuals who possess the courage to free themselves from toxic manipulative bonds can begin to develop a new kind of vision, a clarity that sees beyond superficial words, penetrates behind carefully constructed masks, and discerns the true, often hidden intentions beneath the surface. And it is armed with this hard-won, discerning new vision that we enter the next stage: how to consciously apply Machiavelli's principles of strategic thinking in the complexities of modern life. How to effectively keep the mind shielded, autonomous and clear in a world where virtually everything and everyone seems intent on influencing, persuading, and subtly controlling you. The time has now come to learn how to consciously turn the tables. Machiavelli, let us remember, never wrote with the intention to please the masses or adhere to conventional morality. He demonstrated little concern for appearing ethical, virtuous, or well-intentioned in the traditional sense. His unwavering commitment was to depicting raw, unvarnished reality, the often uncomfortable, power-driven reality that most people instinctively prefer to ignore. And if you genuinely desire to survive, let alone thrive psychologically, in the complex landscape of today's world, you absolutely need to learn to think somewhat like he did, with brutal clarity, employing cold strategy when necessary, and maintaining a degree of emotional detachment from the manipulative games being played around you. Because make no mistake, we are living in an era of constant, pervasive manipulation. Social media algorithms designed to capture and hold your attention. Sophisticated marketing campaigns engineered to create artificial desires. Political rhetoric crafted to sway emotions and obscure facts. Even interpersonal relationships are often rife with subtle power plays and emotional leverage. Everything, it seems, operates based on influence, image, and narrative. Those individuals who fail to understand this underlying game are inevitably, often unknowingly, swallowed by it. Machiavelli possessed a keen understanding of human nature, seeing individuals as largely predictable, driven primarily by powerful forces of self-interest and volatile emotions. And he asserted, with chilling pragmatism, that those who grasp these fundamental psychological mechanisms inherently hold power. He famously stated, "Men judge generally more by their eyes than by their hands, for everyone can see but few can feel," often interpreted as perception is reality. In other words, in the realm of influence, perception often holds more weight than objective truth. And that is precisely how the game largely operates today. Whoever effectively controls the narrative ultimately controls the decisions. Whoever skillfully controls the image inevitably controls the influence. And whoever possesses a deep understanding of the underlying psychological mechanisms can effectively control the behavior of others, often without needing to raise their voice, issue threats, or resort to overt force. In practical terms, what does this mean for you? It means you absolutely must stop living on autopilot, passively accepting information and reacting emotionally without critical thought. Machiavelli did not believe in a universal, unchanging morality. He believed firmly in context. What constitutes a strength or effective strategy in one situation might prove to be a fatal weakness in another. What appears noble or virtuous in abstract theory can translate into strategic suicide. In practical reality, indiscriminate kindness offered without discernment can easily become foolishness, ripe for exploitation. Unwavering honesty delivered without strategic timing or consideration of consequences can amount to self-sabotage. Limitless, unreciprocated altruism can devolve into unwitting servitude. If you genuinely desire to be psychologically free, you need to learn not just to recognize the game being played, but how to consciously play it well, ethically, yet strategically. This begins fundamentally with observation. Learn to read people, much like Machiavelli read the nobles and princes of his time, not primarily by their carefully crafted words or public pronouncements, but by their consistent actions, especially those taken when they believe no one is watching. Evaluate behaviors, not just promises. Analyze patterns, not just excuses. Learn to trust less in spoken words and more in discerning the likely hidden interests driving those words. And above all, consciously practice not reacting immediately. Instead, strive to anticipate. The manipulator acts strategically, often planning several moves ahead. Your most effective defense lies in cultivating the mental discipline to always be thinking one step ahead, considering potential motives and outcomes before responding. Then learn to apply silence as a weapon. One of the biggest mistakes people make, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation, is excessive emotional exposure. They reveal too much, they talk too much, they feel compelled to explain too much. The Machiavellian thinker understands that strategic silence powerfully confuses adversaries, subtly commands respect, and effectively disrupts the manipulator's carefully orchestrated rhythm. When you deliberately choose not to react in the way they expect, their game immediately loses its script. Their power diminishes, and it is precisely within that unexpected void, that unsettling silence, that you begin to regain control. Another essential application is mastering the art of ambiguity. Machiavelli taught that to maintain power and influence, one must often know how to appear virtuous without necessarily being rigidly bound by conventional virtue in every action. In the modern world, this translates to learning how to strategically adapt your language, your posture, your overall presence according to the specific environment and audience, without fundamentally losing or betraying your core essence. You do not need to reveal yourself completely in every situation. You often only need to consciously show enough to effectively control the prevailing perception. The rest, your deeper thoughts, your true vulnerabilities, your strategic intentions, you wisely keep to yourself, because real enduring power often lies precisely in what is not overtly displayed. And perhaps most importantly, take absolute responsibility for your own emotional state. The manipulator fundamentally feeds on your instability. They need you to doubt yourself, to succumb to fear, to hesitate indecisively. When you cultivate deep self-knowledge, practice emotional self-regulation, and remain steadfastly centered, even under pressure, you become psychologically impenetrable to their tactics. Machiavelli wisely wrote, "A prudent man should always follow in the path beaten by great men and imitate those who have been most excellent, so that if his own virtue does not reach that far, it is at least in the odor of it." In other words, learn from the wisdom of those who have mastered the game, whether historical figures like Machiavelli or astute observers of human nature, so that you can finally stop being merely a pawn unknowingly moved by others. Now that you possess a clearer understanding of the intricate workings of manipulation and the strategic principles required to protect yourself from it, one crucial question remains: what should you do with all this knowledge? How do you effectively transform this intellectual understanding into practical embodied strength, into a fundamentally new way of existing in the world, increasingly immune to external manipulative influence? This vital integration is what we will explore in the final, concluding part: how to definitively take control of your own mind and resolve to never be manipulated by anyone again. Are you truly ready to cut the last invisible strings that still subtly control you? Then continue forward. We have now reached the most critical, most actionable point of this entire exploration, and perhaps the insight that is hardest to fully accept and integrate. As long as you do not consciously, deliberately take full control of your own mind, your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, your narratives, someone else inevitably will, and that someone else doesn't necessarily have to be a nefarious Machiavellian villain, a caricatured manipulative figure plotting your downfall. Sometimes, often even, it's simply someone smiling warmly next to you, subtly leveraging your desire for connection or approval. Sometimes it's a limiting belief, a critical phrase you heard repeatedly as a child, that you still carry today unconsciously, shaping your decisions without questioning its validity. Sometimes it's society itself, the pervasive cultural matrix which subtly, yet powerfully shapes you from your earliest years to implicitly obey, habitually yield, and often remain silent when your authentic voice yearns to speak. The manipulation that truly affects you most profoundly is often not just in the overt words or actions of others. It resides just as powerfully, perhaps even more so, within the ingrained thoughts you never learned to critically question. It hides within the intense emotions you treat as absolute, undeniable truths, rather than as transient internal states offering valuable information. It operates through the significant life decisions you perhaps call choices, but which upon deeper reflection were actually induced by underlying fear, pervasive guilt, or the desperate need for external acceptance. Genuine freedom begins the very moment you stop reflexively calling free will what is in fact largely disguised conditioning. But this hard-won freedom inevitably comes at a cost. It requires you to courageously break the comforting illusion that everyone you encounter inherently possesses good intentions towards you. It demands that you systematically dismantle the carefully constructed image you may have built of yourself. The image of someone who must always be kind, perpetually understanding, endlessly available, recognizing that this image may have served as a prison rather than a virtue. It requires you to learn to tolerate the inherent discomfort of setting firm boundaries even when met with resistance. It necessitates bearing the often heavy weight of silence after delivering a necessary no. It demands enduring the potential loneliness that can arise from consciously stepping away from dynamics that harmed you, dynamics that, however dysfunctional, may have seemed like an integral part of your identity. You will finally cease to be easily manipulated when you internalize the profound truth that you no longer fundamentally need to be universally accepted to feel whole, when the paralyzing fear of displeasing others no longer holds ultimate power over your actions and decisions, when your own inner clarity becomes demonstrably greater than your lingering neediness for external validation, and when finally you can look squarely into the eyes of those who have previously attempted to control you and calmly, firmly, yet without malice, simply state or embody the sentiment, no more. What you choose to do with this knowledge now depends entirely on you. You can, of course, simply go back to your life as it was before, attempting to forget everything you've just explored, continuing to passively play the game without fully realizing you are being played. Or you can choose to start today, to begin the lifelong empowering practice of consciously training your mind to meticulously observe yourself and others, to critically analyze motivations and dynamics, to courageously resist manipulative tactics, and to actively rebuild your sense of self based on authenticity and inner strength. You can consciously choose to become the kind of person who does not bend under the pressure of emotional blackmail, who possesses the clarity to see through the masks others wear, who walks firmly on their own chosen path, even when everyone around them seems to be moving in confused circles. Comment below. At what specific moment in your life did you first realize you were being manipulated? What was the click, the turning point that made you truly see the dynamic? Or perhaps are you currently feeling caught within some emotional game and seeking support or insight to help you get out? Share your experience. Speak up, because verbalizing, bringing the unconscious into the light of conscious awareness, is often the very first crucial step towards breaking the cycle. And if this video has genuinely opened your eyes, has sparked a desire for greater autonomy and self-awareness, don't stop here, watch the next one. It is just as important as this exploration, perhaps even more so, as it builds upon these foundational principles. Knowledge is indeed a ladder, and each step consciously taken lifts you a little further from the darkness of unawareness and manipulation. So keep climbing. Because the truth, while sometimes challenging, not only sets you free, it ultimately transforms you. See you there.